ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಪ್ರತಿ ವರ್ಷದಂತೆ ಈ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಜೊತೆ ಘನಿಷ್ಠ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇದ್ದ ದಿವಂಗತ ನಿಟ್ಟೂರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯರ ಸ್ಮರಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ವಿಶೇಷ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ. ನಿಟ್ಟೂರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯರ ಸ್ಮರಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರ ಪುತ್ರ ಪುತ್ರಿ ಪರಿವಾರದವರು ಏರ್ಪಡಿಸಿರುವ ದತ್ತಿಯ ಆಶ್ರಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ. ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯರ ಪರಿವಾರದವರು ಅನೇಕರು ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಜಯತೀರ್ಥ ಪರಿವಾರದವರು, ಎನ್.ಎಸ್. ಸುಬ್ಬಣ್ಣ, ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯ ಪರಿವಾರದವರೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಕೋರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ನಿಟ್ಟೂರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯರ ಪರಿಚಯ ಬಹುಶಃ ಇಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಇದ್ದೇ ಇದೆ. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ 1927ರಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ವಕೀಲ ವೃತ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಆರಂಭಿಸಿದರು. 53ರಲ್ಲಿ ಅಡ್ವೊಕೇಟ್ ಜನರಲ್ ಆದರು. 55ರಲ್ಲಿ ಉಚ್ಚ ನ್ಯಾಯಾಲಯದ ನ್ಯಾಯಾಧೀಶರಾದರು. 61ರಲ್ಲಿ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ಹಂಗಾಮಿ ರಾಜ್ಯಪಾಲರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. 64ರಿಂದ 68ರವರೆಗೆ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರಮಟ್ಟದ ಜಾಗೃತ ಆಯೋಗದ ಪ್ರಥಮ ಲೋಕಾಯುಕ್ತರಾಗಿದ್ದರು, ಸೆಂಟ್ರಲ್ ವಿಜಿಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಕಮಿಷನರ್. ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಟ್ಟೂರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯರ ಸೇವೆ ಸುವಿದಿತವೇ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಸತ್ಯಶೋಧನಾ ಪ್ರಕಟಣಾ ಮಂದಿರದ ಮೂಲಕ ಅನೇಕ ನವೋದಯ ಸಾಹಿತಿಗಳ ಕೃತಿಗಳನ್ನು ಅವರು ಬೆಳಕಿಗೆ ತಂದರು. ಈ ಗೋಖಲೆ ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ವಿಚಾರ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಆರಂಭದ ದಿನಗಳಿಂದ ಅದರ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇದ್ದವರು. 68ರಿಂದ 2004ರವರೆಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಗೌರವ ಕಾರ್ಯದರ್ಶಿಗಳು ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರಿಂದ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲೇ ಪ್ರಭಾವಿತರಾಗಿ ಸರ್ವೋದಯ ಇತ್ಯಾದಿ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳ, ಹಿಂದಿ ಪ್ರಚಾರ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ಸಕ್ರಿಯರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯರು ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ಪತ್ನಿ ಪದ್ಮಮ್ಮ ಅವರು ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಆತ್ಮಕಥೆ ಸತ್ಯಶೋಧನೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಮತ್ತು ಗೀತಾಭಾಷ್ಯ ಅನಾಸಕ್ತಿಯೋಗ ಅದನ್ನು ಇಬ್ಬರು ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರು ಅನ್ನುವ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊಟ್ಟ ಮೊದಲು 1927ರಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಷಾಂತರಿಸಿ ಪ್ರಕಟ ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಬಹುಶಃ ಯಾವುದೇ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಭಾಷೆಗೆ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಆತ್ಮಕಥೆ ಅನುವಾದ ಆಗಿದ್ದು ಅದೇ ಮೊದಲು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಅನೇಕ ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ, ಸಾಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಕ, ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸಕ್ರಿಯರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧಿ ಶಾಂತಿ ಪ್ರತಿಷ್ಠಾನ, ಲೋಕಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಅನೇಕ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಮಾರ್ಗದರ್ಶಕರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. 1954ರಲ್ಲಿ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ವಕೀಲರ ಸಂಘದ ಸಭೆ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಅದಲ್ಲದೆ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಲಾ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಡ್ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಷನ್ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳ ಸದಸ್ಯರೂ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಅವರಿಗೆ 2003ರಲ್ಲಿ ಗೌರವಾರ್ಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರೇಟ್ ನೀಡಿತ್ತು. 1997ರಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ಕನ್ನಡ ರಾಜ್ಯೋತ್ಸವದ ಪುರಸ್ಕಾರ ಕೂಡ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಸಂದಿತ್ತು. 1988ರಲ್ಲಿ DVGಯವರ ಜನ್ಮಶತಾಬ್ದಿ ವರ್ಷದ ಅಂಗವಾಗಿ ಅಮೆರಿಕ ಮತ್ತು ಇಂಗ್ಲೆಂಡ್ ದೇಶಗಳಲ್ಲಿ DVG ಕುರಿತ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದರು. ಅವರ ಸರಳ ಬದುಕು, ಜ್ಞಾಪಕ ಶಕ್ತಿ, ಜನಸಂಪರ್ಕ ಎಲ್ಲವೂ ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧವೇ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಈ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಸಂಪರ್ಕ ಇದ್ದವ್ರಿಗಂತೂ ಅವರು ಸದಾ ಪರಿಚಿತರೇ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಅವರ ಸ್ಮರಣೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಇದ್ದೇ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಈ ವರ್ಷದ ವಿಶೇಷ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ನೀಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗೂ ಪರಿಚಿತರು, ನನಗೆ ಅನೇಕ ದಶಕಗಳ ಪರಿಚಿತರಾದ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ MV ನಾಡ್ಕರ್ಣಿ ಅವರು ಆಗಮಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದಿಂದ ಡಾಕ್ಟರೇಟ್ ಪಡೆದ ನಂತರ ಸುಮಾರು 25 ವರ್ಷ ಕಾಲ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಫಾರ್ ಸೋಷಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಧ್ಯಾಪಕರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅರ್ಥಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ, ಎಕಲಾಜಿಕಲ್ ಇಕನಾಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅದರ ಘಟಕವನ್ನು ಎಂಬತ್ತೊಂದರಲ್ಲಿ ಆರಂಭಿಸಿದವರೇ ಇವರು. ಈಗ ಅದು ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಇಕಲಾಜಿಕಲ್ ಇಕನಾಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನುವ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಮುಂದುವರೆದಿದೆ. ಐಸೆಕ್ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆಯ ಮೊದಲ ಸಂಪಾದಕರು ಇವರೇ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಏತನ್ಮಧ್ಯೆ 1999-2002 ವರ್ಷಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಗುಲ್ಬರ್ಗಾ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದ ವೈಸ್ ಚಾನ್ಸಲರ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ICSSR ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಫೆಲೋ 3 ವರ್ಷ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಮಲ್ಟಿ ಡಿಸಿಪ್ಲಿನರಿ ಡೆವಲಪ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಧಾರವಾಡದಲ್ಲಿರುವ ICSSRನ ಅಂಗಸಂಸ್ಥೆ, ಅದರ ನಿರ್ವಾಹಕ ಮಂಡಳಿಯಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಇವರು ಸಕ್ರಿಯರಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಗ್ರಿಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇಕಲಾಜಿಕಲ್ ಇಕನಾಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅವರ ವಿಶೇಷ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರ. ಆದರೆ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಇಕಾನಮಿ, ಅಭ್ಯುದಯ ಅರ್ಥಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಮೊದಲಾದವುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರ ವಿಶೇಷ ತಜ್ಞತೆ ಇದೆ. 55ನೇ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಅಗ್ರಿಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಇಕನಾಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಸಮ್ಮೇಳನದ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷತೆ ವಹಿಸಿದ್ದರು. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಅವರು ಈ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಜರ್ನಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಅಗ್ರಿಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಇಕನಾಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಆ ಪ್ರೌಢ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆಯ ಸಂಪಾದಕ ಮಂಡಳಿಯ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರು ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು 3 ವರ್ಷ. ಸುಮಾರು ಅರ್ಥಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟ ಹಾಗೆ ಸುಮಾರು 18 ಗ್ರಂಥಗಳನ್ನು ಬರೆದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. 150ಕ್ಕೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಶೋಧ ಪ್ರಬಂಧಗಳನ್ನು ಬರೆದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈಚಿನ ವರ್ಷಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ತತ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ, ನೀತಿಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ, ಧರ್ಮ ಇವುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಆಸಕ್ತರಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈಗ ಸುಮಾರು 1 ದಶಕ ಹಿಂದೆ ಅವರು ಬರೆದ ಹಿಂದೂ ಧರ್ಮ ಮತ್ತು ಜಾತಿ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ವಿಶಾಲವಾದ ಗೌರವವನ್ನು, ಜನಪ್ರಿಯತೆಯನ್ನು ಪಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತು. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಹಿಂದೂಯಿಸಮ್ ಎ ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್, ಈಗ ಒಂದು 6-7 ವರ್ಷದ ಹಿಂದೆ ಅವರು ಬರೆದ ಗ್ರಂಥ ಕೂಡ ಬಹಳ ಜನಪ್ರಿಯವಾಗಿ ಪುನರ್ಮುದ್ರಣ ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಅವರ ಇತ್ತೀಚಿನ ಕೃತಿ ಎಥಿಕ್ಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ಅವರ್ ಟೈಮ್ಸ್, ಎಸ್ಸೇಸ್ ಇನ್ ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಈಗ 2 ವರ್ಷ ಹಿಂದೆ ಪ್ರಕಟ ಆಯಿತು. ಇದೀಗ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಬುಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಹಿಂದೂಯಿಸಮ್ ಅನ್ನುವ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೌಢ ಗ್ರಂಥದ ರಚನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ತೊಡಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ MV ನಾಡಕರ್ಣಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಗೋಖಲೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ನಿಟ್ಟೂರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾವ್ ಅವರ ಪರಿವಾರದ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ವಿಷಯ ರೆಲೆವೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಸ್. ಗಾಂಧಿಯ ಮಾರ್ಗದ ಗುಣ ದೋಷಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ವಿಮರ್ಶೆ ಮಾಡೋರು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಆದರೆ ಆ ಮಾರ್ಗ ಹಲವಾರು ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಆಚರಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗಲೂ ಇರುವುದಂತೂ ಕಣ್ಣಿಗೆ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಅನೇಕ ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಸಭ್ಯ ಜನತೆಗೆ ಲಭ್ಯವಿರುವ ಏಕೈಕ ಮಾರ್ಗವೂ ಇರಬಹುದು. ಜಾರ್ಖಂಡದ ಹಜಾರಿಬಾಗ್ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ 35 ದೈತ್ಯ ಕಂಪನಿಗಳ ಗಣಿಗಾರಿಕೆಗೆ ವಿರುದ್ಧವಾಗಿ 200ಕ್ಕೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಗ್ರಾಮಗಳವರು ಕಳೆದ 1 ದಶಕದಿಂದ ಅಹಿಂಸಾತ್ಮಕ ಪ್ರತಿಭಟನೆ ನಡೆಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ತಮಿಳುನಾಡಿನ ತಿರುನೆಲ್ವೇಲಿ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂದಂಕುಲಂ ಅಣುಸ್ಥಾವರದ ವಿರುದ್ಧ ಸತತವಾಗಿ ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯ ಜನರ ಪ್ರತಿಭಟನೆ ನಡೆದಿದೆ. ಸರ್ಕಾರ ತನ್ನ ಪಾಶವಿ ಶಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಧಾರಾಳವಾಗಿ ಬಳಸಿದರೂ ಜನ ಸಂಯಮ ಕಳೆದುಕೊಂಡಿಲ್ಲ. ರಾಯಗಢದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂಬಾನಿಗಳ ವಿಶೇಷ ಆರ್ಥಿಕ ವಲಯ ಯೋಜನೆಗೆ ಜನರು ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿಲ್ಲ. ಗಮನಿಸಬೇಕಾದ ಸಂಗತಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ಈ ಜನಪರ ಆಂದೋಲನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತೊಡಗಿರೋರೆಲ್ಲ ಏನೋ ಗಾಂಧಿ ವಾಂಗ್ಮಯವನ್ನು ಓದಿಕೊಂಡವರು ಹಾಗೇನಿಲ್ಲ. ಅವ್ರನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರೇರೇಪಿಸಿರೋದು ಸಹಜವಾದ ಒಂದು ಸಾತ್ವಿಕ ಪ್ರವೃತ್ತಿ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಸಹಜ ಮಾನಸಿಕತೆಯನ್ನು ಉಳಿಸಿಕೊಂಡವರಲ್ಲಿ ಆರೋಗ್ಯಕರ ಸ್ಪಂದನವನ್ನು ಎಬ್ಬಿಸಬಲ್ಲ ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯವನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದೇ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಮಾರ್ಗದ ವೈಶಿಷ್ಟ್ಯ. ಕೇವಲ ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದ ಸಾಫಲ್ಯ ವೈಫಲ್ಯಗಳ ಆಧಾರದ ಮೇಲೆ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರನ್ನು ಅಳೆಯಬಾರದು ಅಂತ ಸೂಚಿಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾವನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಯಿತು. ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಹೆಸರಿನ ಜೊತೆ ನಿಕಟ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇರುವ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಸ್ವದೇಶಿ. ಸ್ವದೇಶಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನೇನೋ ಕಲ್ಪನೆಗಳು ಪ್ರಚಲಿತ ಇವೆ. ತಾತ್ವಿಕವಾಗಿ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರಿಗಿಂತ ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಶತಮಾನಗಳ ಹಿಂದಿನಿಂದಲೇ ಸ್ವದೇಶಿ ಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಪ್ರಚಲಿತವಾಗಿದೆ. ಸ್ವದೇಶಿ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಒಂದು ಅಖಂಡ ಜೀವನ ದರ್ಶನವೇ ಹೊರತು ಅದು ಕೇವಲ ಮಾರುಕಟ್ಟೆ ವ್ಯವಹಾರಗಳಿಗಷ್ಟೇ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದ್ದು ಅಲ್ಲ. ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರಿಗಿಂತ ಹಿಂದೆಯೇ ಭಾರತೇಂದು ಹರಿಶ್ಚಂದ್ರ, ಶ್ರೀ ಅರವಿಂದರು ಮೊದಲಾದವರು ಪ್ರಖರವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವದೇಶಿ ಚಿಂತನೆಯನ್ನು ಪ್ರತಿಪಾದನೆ ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಅರ್ಥಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಕಕ್ಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಆಧುನಿಕ ಅರ್ಥಶಾಸ್ತ್ರದ ಪಿತಾಮಹ 18ನೇ ಶತಮಾನದ ಆ್ಯಡಮ್ ಸ್ಮಿತ್ ಮಹಾಶಯನೇ ತನ್ನ ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧ ವೆಲ್ತ್ ಆಫ್ ನೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಕೃತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಏಕಸ್ವಾಮ್ಯ, ವಾಣಿಜ್ಯ ಕೇಂದ್ರೀಕರಣ, ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಕರಣ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಪ್ರವೃತ್ತಿಗಳನ್ನು ತೀವ್ರವಾಗಿ ಖಂಡಿಸಿದ್ದ. ಅದೇ ಪರಂಪರೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ವಿದೇಶಿ ಪ್ರಭುತ್ವವನ್ನು ವಿರೋಧಿಸುವ ಒಂದು ಸಾಧನವಾಗಿ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರು ವಿದೇಶಿ ಉತ್ಪನ್ನಗಳ ಬಹಿಷ್ಕಾರ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಕ್ರಮಗಳನ್ನು ಬಳಸಿದರು. ಇದೀಗ ಜೀವನಾಧಾರವಾದ ಕೃಷಿ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರ, ಚಿಲ್ಲರೆ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರ ಮೊದಲಾದವುಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೋತ್ತರ ಕಂಪನಿಗಳು ಸ್ಥಳೀಯ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳ ಬೆಂಬಲ ಪಡೆದು ಏಕಸ್ವಾಮ್ಯ ನಡೆಸ್ತಾ ಇವೆ. ಇದರ ವಿರುದ್ಧ ಭಾರತವೂ ಸೇರಿದಂತೆ ಹಲವಾರು ದೇಶಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿರೋಧ ಹೊಮ್ಮಿದೆ. ಒಂದು ಅತ್ಯಲ್ಪ ವರ್ಗವನ್ನು ಇನ್ನಷ್ಟು ಶ್ರೀಮಂತಗೊಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರುವ ಈ ಧೋರಣೆಗಳ ದುಷ್ಪರಿಣಾಮಗಳು ಅಧಿಕ ಕೆಳವರ್ಗಗಳವರ ಬದುಕನ್ನು ದುರ್ಭರಗೊಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ಅನುಭವಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಆಕರ್ಷಕ ಭಾಷೆ ಬಳಸಿ ಈಗ ದೇಶದ ಎಲ್ಲೆಡೆ ನಡೀತಾ ಇರೋದು ಜೀವನ ಸಂಪನ್ಮೂಲಗಳ ಹಸ್ತಾಂತರಣವೇ. ಈ ಜೀವನ ವಿರೋಧಿ ಪ್ರವೃತ್ತಿಗಳ ವಿರುದ್ಧ ಸಜ್ಜನ ಶಕ್ತಿ ಸಂಘಟಿತಗೊಳ್ಳಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಈ ವಿಷಮ ಸಂಧಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಆಧುನಿಕ ನಾಗರಿಕತೆಯ ರಾಕ್ಷಸ ಸ್ವರೂಪವನ್ನು ಕುರಿತು ಗಾಂಧಿ ನೀಡಿರುವ ಅನೇಕ ಒಳನೋಟಗಳು ಈಗ ಮತ್ತೆ ಮೆಲುಕು ಹಾಕೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಯೋಗ್ಯವಾಗಿವೆ. ಈ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನ ಬಹುಕಾಲದ ಮಿತ್ರರು ಮತ್ತು ಸದಾ ಜನಪರ ಚಿಂತನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ತೊಡಗಿಕೊಂಡವರೂ ಆದ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಎಂ.ವಿ. ನಾಡ್ಕರ್ಣಿ ಅವರು ನೀಡ್ತಾ ಇರುವ ಪರಾಮರ್ಶನೆ ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರಯೋಜನಕರವೂ ಸಂಗತವೂ ಆಗುತ್ತದೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ವಿಶ್ವಾಸ ನನಗೆ ಇದೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನು ಆರಂಭಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಎಂ.ವಿ. ನಾಡ್ಕರ್ಣಿ ಅವರಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ.
ರಾಮಸ್ವಾಮಿಯವರೇ, ಶ್ರೀ ಸುಬ್ಬಣ್ಣನವರೇ, ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶಿವಣ್ಣನವರೇ ಮತ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲ ಆತ್ಮೀಯರೇ, ನನಗೆ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತನಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಅನುಮತಿ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು. ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡಬಹುದಿತ್ತು, ಆದರೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ಅಭ್ಯಾಸವಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರೆ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತ. ಐ ಫೀಲ್ ಗ್ರೇಟ್ಲಿ ಆನರ್ಡ್ by being invited to deliver this Sri Nittur Srinivasa Rao Memorial Lecture at this prestigious institute. I knew Sri Nittur Srinivasa Rao as a life member of ISEC, and he used to attend the general body meetings very regularly. I never thought that he missed even a single meeting ever since I joined the institute, and it was a great pleasure to interact with him. And he was so nice, so soft-spoken, and very friendly and affectionate. I liked him very much, and I have very fond memories of his association. He was kind enough to even attend the wedding of my elder son in 2001. He personally attended, came and blessed the newly married couple, me and my wife, and I have really very fond memories of him. Srinivasa Rao was a Gandhian in many respects. I always saw him in khadi whenever he used to come to ISEC, and he was, I thought, very Gandhian in his attitude, and even in simple living, and I heard that even in eating he was very Gandhian in his habit. He used to eat very little, and he explained his eating habits by saying that he masticulated whatever little he ate so many times and so thoroughly that what little he ate was enough for him. That's how he used to explain it. So the topic I have chosen for today's lecture, this relevance of Gandhian approach, I think would have been very dear to him. Well, I can rephrase this topic by saying in a question form, is Gandhi still relevant? If so, in what way? So that's the theme of my today's lecture. It may sound rather daring to raise this question in these days of globalization and unprecedented industrialization and global capitalism, you see. And it looks, where is Gandhi in today's world, one may even say. And ironically, in his own time, both Dr. Ambedkar and his own protege, Jawaharlal Nehru, did not see eye to eye with Gandhi in many respects. Even, in fact, Dr. Ambedkar differed from Gandhi very sharply and more comprehensively than Nehru. One can contrast somewhat these views, Gandhian views, from the views of these prominent leaders. For example, Dr. Mahatma Gandhi thought that modern civilization is a very significant deviation from morality and humanism. But for Dr. Ambedkar, this was the only hope for oppressed classes, because the caste oppression was so much in the traditional culture. He thought that it's only modernization, urbanization, this will give the only escape for caste oppression. That is how Dr. Ambedkar thought. And for Dr. Ambedkar, Gandhi was nothing short of a revolutionary, reactionary. And he was a very conservative person in Ambedkar's point of view. And moreover, while Dr. Ambedkar thought that village was a cesspool of caste oppression and conservatism, Gandhiji thought that village was a center for economic development and political development. So there was a tremendous difference between both Dr. Ambedkar and Gandhi. And it may sound so opposite, so contradictory, that one may find it difficult to reconcile the two. But I think the events are proving that they coexist. Both Dr. Ambedkar and Gandhi coexist happily today in the Indian intellectual world and even in political world. How exactly we can see. Even as far as Jawaharlal Nehru was concerned, there was a lot of difference between him and Gandhiji. Jawaharlal Nehru never was sympathetic to Gandhian ideas of small-scale production. He was not enthusiastic about his village, this cottage industries and so on. His idea was that only mechanization, industrialization, big dams, big industry, that will save India, that will take India to the path of modernization. And Gandhiji's views were totally opposite to this. And towards Gandhiji's, around 1947, these differences between Nehru and Gandhiji, and not only Nehru, even between Congress and Gandhi, became so sharp that on his last birthday, that was on October 2nd, 1947, he expressed, "Ab mere koi sunta nahi." And person who wanted to live for 125 years prayed to God, "Please take me now." So that was the situation in 1994. Now, if this is the case, how do you dare to pose this question? Is Gandhi relevant today? Perhaps even during Gandhi's own time, his own protege, let alone Dr. Ambedkar, his own protege, Jawaharlal Nehru, thought that he was irrelevant and he wrote him off. And yet, Mahatma Gandhi has staged a very sharp comeback, very spectacular comeback, which was more than what was expected by many, even by Gandhians themselves. Well, this observation may sound surprising because one may see that India has not taken the path of decentralized, the kind of path which Gandhiji showed. It took up to big industrialization, big dams, and so on, you see. And it embraced even capitalism in a big way. And though, of course, there were lip sympathy to socialism, it was mainly the economy became more and more capitalist. And in this setting, we have to examine the relevance of Gandhiji. Now, you may I am somewhat following the Indian tradition of argumentation, of first giving the view of the opposition, the Pratipaksha, and then coming to oppose and then see what is the actually Gandhi's own ideas, so that there is a complete contrast and we understand Gandhiji's relevance sharply against this background of these stalwarts who oppose Gandhiji. Gandhiji's approach, let us say his approach to modernity, his approach to economic development, his approach to even political development, were expressed in a very simple language as early as in 1909 in his famous tract, short booklet, Hindu Swaraj, 1909. Of course, in this booklet, he opposed railways, electricity, modern medicine, doctors, to such an extent that people, even at that time, thought that Gandhi is crazy. Now, the point is that Gandhiji should not taken at his literally on his words. We should not take him mechanically by what he said, but try to go behind exactly what he meant. And that is what is necessary in understanding relevance of Gandhiji. The main crux of Hindu Swaraj was that it was an attack on modernity, modern civilization, and even his attack on mechanization or the the energy intensive or mechanical technology had some kind of an ethical and moral justification. And this moral justification was derived from his twin principles of truth and non-violence. In fact, he said always that he always believed in truth and non-violence, and these principles are such that the more and more you try to understand, the more and more they are applicable to worldly life, to the way that you live. For Gandhi, truth was not a purely transcendental principle. It was something which had to be applied to day-to-day life. It was experiential. And he believed that life has to be expressed in truth. Truth life is to be completely soaked in truth, and that is how you find happiness. So Gandhiji, for Gandhiji, truth had to be applied to not only to personal life, but also to public life. Politics, economics, no sphere of public life or private life was to be free from or isolated from truth. And in fact, that is the purpose of life, to live in truth. That is how Gandhiji believed in truth and non-violence. And his criterion of evaluating civilization, modern civilization, also was based on truth and violence, non-violence. Now, one may say that key to happiness, life's main purpose is to have happiness, not pursuit of truth, as Gandhiji believed. But Gandhiji said that it is in the pursuit of truth that our happiness lies. In fact, he said, the key to happiness lies in the worship of truth, which is the giver of all things. If we give up truth, if we don't have any respect for truth, then our day-to-day life becomes very difficult and there will be more and more unhappiness. In fact, imagine for a moment, suppose I go to how truth and non-violence are the very basis for the formation of the society. Let us say I go to a salon, have a nice wash, hair wash and haircut and a wash and then shave and everything, and then the barber expects that I pay him his not only usual charges but even a tip. But suppose I simply walk away without paying anything. Then he will raise a voice and then he will raise his voice and then shout, and then probably people will gather and then they will compel me to pay the barber's charges. Why do people come and, in that case, why do people gather together and force me to pay the charges to the barber? Because everybody believes that, there is something like truth in life and one has to abide by truth. And without abiding by truth, no ordinary life will be possible. So that was a firm conviction of Gandhi. This is only a small instance, but you can apply this instance to many, and then it is only by applying truth through life that life becomes happy and smooth. That is what Gandhiji thought. One of his eminent commentators, Raghavan Iyer, interpreting Gandhi, said, it is not how Gandhi looked upon truth. It is not enough for thought to be based on truth. The life of the thinker must express it, must represent it visibly in his action. So that is what that is what makes Gandhiji's approach to truth very distinguished. It is not just a transcendental principle, but it is a practical principle applicable for day-to-day life. And it could be applied to economic development, and that is how he developed his approach. It could be applied to resolving the environmental crisis. It can be applied to conflict resolution. It can be applied to resolving religious differences. So it is, in fact, now it may not be possible for me to cover all these issues of how Gandhiji's principles become relevant in all these aspects. But I will try my best to cover, at least outline some of these ideas, how relevant they are to all these issues. Now, an important aspect of Gandhiji's approach to truth is that he thought that non-violence is the other side of the coin of truth. It is the same coin, but truth and non-violence are exactly the same. But Gandhiji's concept of non-violence is rather distinguished. It is not simply a personal virtue. In fact, J.B. Kripalani, one of disciples of Gandhi, who survived him, and then he became, though when Gandhi was living, he did oppose, not but he used to have heated arguments with Gandhi and some of his on some of his ideas. But later on, he appreciated Gandhi and became a Gandhian. He said, commenting on Gandhian concept of non-violence, he distinguished between two kinds of non-violence, Kripalani. One is the non-violence of Christ. It has no social implication. It is for the salvation of the soul. It is not used for correcting the wrongs in society. What distinguishes Gandhi is that he made non-violence as an instrument for correcting political, social and economic wrongs. And that is, non-violence in Gandhi's view transcended from an individual virtue ethic to a social principle to be applied at the collective level to bring a social justice, to correct social evils and even win freedom for the country. Of course, Gandhi was not an inventor of non-violence as a tool for getting political freedom. In fact, the term was known as passive resistance earlier, and Marxists had already opposed it even earlier than Gandhi's time. And Marxists even distrusted this passive resistance as an instrument of getting justice. And they said it is actually a bourgeois way of doing away with or preventing a revolution and establishing bourgeois rule. It is only trying to compromise. It is a way of compromising it, and ultimately, through non-violence or passive resistance, it is the bourgeois who wins. Now, but Gandhi used this non-violence in even a broader way. Gandhi's uniqueness as such, consists in using this method lies in two things. One is that he gave a philosophy and justification for non-violence, and two, he used it again not only against local oppressors or in a small region, as happened in peasant struggles, but against a whole empire and against the state itself. So Gandhiji, even when he used this non-violence, had some kind of his own contribution to the concept of non-violence. You see, it was not as if he simply borrowed it. He creatively employed it for many more things, and what is important, he developed a philosophy of it. You see, Gandhiji's most compelling philosophical argument against violence or for non-violence is that means determine the end. If the means are violent, it is like letting a genie out of a bottle and you don't know how to get the genie back into the bottle. Violence can feed on itself on violence, and simply it becomes self-aggravating, difficult to control it once it is unleashed. And against a very powerful state, it is very difficult for mobilizing masses in a violent armed struggle. But it is much easier to mobilize masses in a non-violent struggle against social justice. Gandhiji saw this practical significance of non-violence. This was not only theoretical but also practical significance of non-violence which impressed Gandhi. But it doesn't mean, of course, that Gandhiji respected non-violence only for its instrumental value. He respected non-violence for its own sake also, not just for its instrumental value. Well, that is an important thing to note. See. And in fact, he felt that his disciple, J.C. Kumarappa, has developed these Gandhian ideas, and his how civilization becomes more and more non-violent over history. And Gandhiji himself believed that he defined no, he defined civilization in moral terms rather than in terms of artifacts. In fact, Gandhiji called it as a civilization when man can find his self-worth, he can reach his potential, he can realize his duties and becomes non-violent in his approach to resolving all his problems. That is the way he measured civilization. And not in terms of artifacts, not in terms of possessions, not in terms of merely technological development. Gandhiji never measured civilization in terms of merely technological measurement, but in terms of moral development. That was his creature thing. And that is why, it is because of this that he criticized modern civilization in Hindu Swaraj. Because he thought that the modern civilization doesn't meet this criterion of non-violence. Non-violence, modern civilization actually breeds on violence. There is so much exploitation in modern civilization, particularly in capitalist order. And he saw that even this socialism or communism is no solution to this problem of non-violence, because he in fact was very sad to note that even this communist alternative or a socialist alternative was as violent or as exploitative as capitalism itself. And that is why Gandhiji wanted to show another path to development. That is where Gandhiji's contribution lies and his relevance. So, when he criticized modernity, his whole philosophical outlook to civilization has to be appreciated. It's not, he may have criticized railways, he may have criticized modern technology, modern factories, and he may sound unrealistic. But see, you have to exaggerate. Sometimes, see, it's a kind of a poetic exaggeration, you can say. Unless you exaggerate things, you may not appreciate the actual philosophy behind this. And though Gandhiji used railways, he used telegraph, he used telephone, but still he opposed modern civilization. That is because of this philosophy. It's not so much that the artifacts were, in fact, he said later on in several ways that he is not opposed to machinery as such, but the impact of machinery and the way machinery is used. In fact, he welcomed Singer's sewing machine, where, see, if machinery relieves a human being from drudgery and tediousness in work, see, then he would welcome this machinery, like Singer's sewing machine. But not if it replaces man. Because he said the very goal of human development, very goal of economic development is advancement of human happiness. And how do you displace human beings in the course of development? How do you call it development if it causes a lot of unemployment, if it causes a lot of poverty? That is why he wanted to show another path of economic development and political development, and that is what is makes Gandhiji relevant even today. This relevance has to be judged not in terms of the inconsistency between his ideas and the present, but the relevance has to be judged in terms of the contradictions in the present society, contradictions in the present economy, and see how Gandhian philosophy, how Gandhian approach can probably give a solution, show a way out of this critical situation. That is how we have to see. Now, how was he actually, what are the major ingredients of his approach? One which one might look as negative, but still very important, is a conscious limitation of human wants. Modern economic development, modern civilization, economic growth thrives on multiplication of wants. And it is this multiplication of wants which has led to environmental crisis also. People simply want things, more and more things. They want to possess more and more commodities, purchase more and more commodities. And these wants feed on themselves. They become self-aggravating. And this leads to a crisis. And a kind of a crazy speed in the civilization, which can drive people mad. I mean, for example, the kind of traffic which you see in Bangalore, you see. Well, basically, if you see, we see it's a symptom of our civilization. Now, Gandhi's solution was conscious limitation of our wants. So, in fact, once he said, as early as in 1909, I mean, what he would have said is, perhaps that is why he preferred to die earlier than 125. He wanted to live for 125 years, but he prayed God to end his life much earlier, probably because of the kind of things which were happening. Now, even in 1909, when he wrote this Hindu Swaraj, he said, God forbid that India should ever take to industrialization after the manner of the West. The economic imperialism of a single tiny kingdom, England, is today keeping the world in chains. If an entire nation of 300 million, now it is, of course, the population is now more than 1 billion now of India. At that time it was 300 million. If an entire nation of 300 million took to similar economic exploitation, it would strip the world bare like locusts. So this is the trend of modern civilization. If it persists and if it becomes, when the modern economic growth was present only in one or a few countries, well, probably it could be somehow accommodated. But if all countries take to this path, then God save earth. So that is how what Gandhi said, you see. Now, one might say that this conscious limitation of wants is something which is an impractical ideal, you see. But we have to really see whether it is really that impractical. Let me illustrate. Let us suppose a cardiac patient goes to a doctor, cardiologist. Cardiologist has all the technology for treating cardiac disease. He is an expert. Let us suppose he is an expert surgeon. He can do this bypass surgery. He can do everything. He is a great technologist as far as heart ailments are concerned. Does he tell the patient that you don't worry, you have heart disease, is it not? Don't worry, I have all the technology. You behave as you like. You enjoy life. You eat as much as you like. Don't worry. You can sit before the TV. You can sleep all day. But when there is an aggravation, you come to me. I will solve your problem. I have the technology. Does the cardiologist tell the patient like that? He will instead say, well, I may have the technology, but you have to change your lifestyle. You have to eat less of fat foods. You have to eat more of soluble fiber. You have to do more exercise. You have to do yoga. Don't sit before the TV all the day. You walk, take exercise. He will advise him to change his lifestyle, in spite of the fact that he is a supreme expert technologist. This is the importance of limitation of wants. See, unless we change our lifestyle, we will not be able to solve the environmental crisis. We will not be able to solve many problems. This mad craziness of speed, you see, all this will not be solved. In fact, in his alternative, he suggested not speed but slowness. What he suggested was grace of life, grace in life. It is culture, not the commodities. It's the culture, it is the civilization, the moral development from which you can derive more happiness. You can have more art, you can have more culture, out of which you can derive happiness, more literature, you read more books. Why should you simply have more and more commodities and energy intensive kind of things, So that is how Gandhi's emphasize multiplication or conscious limitation of wants. But there is one rider to this. This teaching about conscious limitation of wants is applicable to the elite, not to the poor, starving masses. It will be a cruel joke to tell the masses, to poor masses who are already starving, to have conscious limitation of wants, because they are involuntarily, their wants are highly controlled, they are not enough to feed. And Gandhiji's solution was that you first attend to their wants. You limit your wants. His advice to elite was, you limit your wants, but take care of the poor. See that their basic needs are first satisfied. Then let them live a life of dignity and grace. Let them not suffer for want of food, for want of home, for want of clothing, for want of basic necessities. So the whole advice about conscious limitation of wants was applicable to the elite and not to the hungry or the poor as such. And as and when, of course, basic needs are met, as and when, then the basic needs of the poor are met, then you can slowly raise the level of wants to the level of comfort. Luxuries may not be allowed, but comforts. Gandhiji didn't say that we should not enjoy life, we should not have any kind of a comfort in life. He did say, he did allow, he did say we can have more comforts, but after the basic needs of the poor are satisfied. See, the beauty of Gandhian approach is that its different dimensions or different teachings form a coherent whole. For example, the aim of economic development is to bring dignity to all human beings, particularly of the poor. He did want economic development. He did emphasize rural reconstruction and development, but that is to raise the standard of living of the poor, to bring them some dignity to their lives, to become grace. And the poor, and if this now, see how it is to be done. If the poor have to be taken care of, if the poor have to have their dignity in life, they should become the masters of the production process. It is the production by the masses which he wanted, not mass production. He did not want mass production, mechanized assembly line production, but he wanted production by the masses, where the poor, the worker have full control on the production process. And this meant in turn that the whole thing was to be small scale and decentralized. And which means, once you say it's a small scale and decentralized, it means that it has to first priority is to meet local needs, local economic needs of the village or of the block or a cluster of village. The first priority for the production process is to meet the basic needs of your own locality or your own village or a cluster of villages as such. It doesn't mean that you have to confine yourself only to producing things only that you want. He did not mind exports and imports, provided it is not, for example, exports can be allowed, provided it is not at the cost of depriving the local people of their basic needs. He didn't mind imports, provided it is not at the cost of livelihood of the poor by displacing their jobs, displacing them in their jobs, So imports should not compete with jobs locally. So it is to be, the whole process as such was, economic production has to be in that way decentralized. Now, if when it is decentralized, it has to be labor intensive in technology, not energy intensive. So, labor intensive technology, but of course, it doesn't mean, you are not an absolutist. As I said, I took the example of Singer machine, you see. Well, a kind, a conscious, a choice of machinery where it reduces human discomfort and human tediousness and drudgery, you would welcome, but not mechanization which will displace human beings. So, labor intensive technology was to be the basis of the production process. Just as, so mass production leads to labor intensity in production. Now, this labor intensity and local needs as such will also mean that you will be saving a lot on transport cost. And the energy, it will be energy saving. In fact, let me tell you an instance of, you must have, many of you may have read this Schumacher's book, famous book, Small is Beautiful. In this, he gives a little, ironically, he gives an example. He was standing near, in London at some point, and he saw a lorry load of biscuits going from London to Manchester, lorry load. And within 5-10 minutes, another lorry load of biscuits came from Manchester to London. So Schumacher wondered, what is this going on? Is this transport, two-way transport of biscuits from one place and again getting back, did it improve the nutritional value of biscuits? Then he answers himself, it only raised the cost of production, cost of biscuits to the buyers in both cities, and it involved a lot of energy costs because transport meant a lot of energy. So the Gandhiji's solution was, if it's a locally based production, decentralized economy as such, would meet not only local needs, but it also will be highly energy saving and environment friendly. That is how he saw it. Now, now this is of course the economic dimension of it. Now the political dimension of decentralization is that once you have this economic decentralization, political decentralization follows suit. Because political economy, in fact, political system cannot be isolated from economic system. If economic system is decentralized, political system can also be decentralized. If economic system is centralized highly in the hands of big industries and so on, see, and global capitalism and this dominates the whole economy, then political system also gets highly centralized. Not so, in fact, under global capitalism, the centralization of politics becomes so high that it transcends even national frontiers, and one or two nations become dominant over the whole globe. Now, in fact, one country can become more can dominate its economy, can dominate the whole world, or a few countries, and all the rest will be simply helpless observers in this. So, see, the point to appreciate here is that economic decentralization and political decentralization are consistent with each other, they go with each other. And if you give up economic centralization, then political decentralization will be difficult. We cannot have global capitalism and at the same time Gram Swaraj, see, at the same time. That will be a little difficult, you see. So, this is the way that he thought. Therefore, village had to be the unit, a central unit both for economy and polity. Now, What would have been Gandhiji's answer to Dr. Ambedkar's charge that villages are cesspools of politics, cesspools of caste oppression, orthodoxy, superstition, and exploitation, feudal exploitation. And how can we, it's actually urbanization which promises the only hope for the oppressed. That was Ambedkar's view, you see. What would be Gandhi's reply to this? Well, Gandhi did not deny that there is a lot of caste oppression, feudal exploitation, superstition in villages. He did admit. That is the villages as of today. But he said, in his approach, these villages have to be cured of these evils, cured of this disease. Let me illustrate this. Suppose we have a patient with tuberculosis. How do you treat this? How do you treat this man? You have to cure him of tuberculosis. Since he is a patient of, you can't say that you ignore. Let us put him in a cell and let him die there. Is that the solution? The solution is to cure him of the disease. Similarly, the solution is cure the villages of these social evils first. And then, of course, this will think out. He did not deny the importance of curing the villages of these evils. Let me take another example. Let us say there is a baby who has become very dirty. It has become very dirty. The solution is to give a bath to the baby, make it clean, not throw the baby out. So the situation is exactly similar as far as villages are concerned. Yes, villages are dirty, make them clean. Villages have a lot of evils, cure them of these evils. And it is our duty. It is the duty of the people to cure villages. And these can be done not by simply legislation. Gandhiji didn't believe in only legislation as a solution to this problem. His solution was moral development of people. People should themselves, moral education and moral development of people is more important than legislation. You can have legislation, but this is more important. For example, we have seen the child marriages. How difficult it has been to curb child marriages through legislation. It is through moral development, education, that you have to solve many of these problems. So, this is what his solution. An important principle of Gandhiji was bread labor, the importance that he gave to bread labor. See, his importance to labor intensive technology, in fact, dominates Gandhian approach to economic development. He thought deeply over why poor people are detested. That is because we have contempt for manual labor. So Gandhiji wanted to give dignity to manual labor. What is important is that we should respect the value of manual labor, physical value of manual labor. And he advised that every person should engage in bread labor, what he called as bread labor, should earn his living by the sweat of his brow, not by just intellectual work, but by physical work. And he taught this in his ashram also. In his ashrams also, everybody had to do every job, including scavenging, cleaning the toilet, sweeping, everything. Everybody has to do every job by turn. Nobody would escape. That was Gandhian approach, and he said the dignity of labor is an important principle which has been forgotten in India, and people who live by the sweat of their brow are detested because they work by hand. which is a very, very unethical principle in Gandhian philosophy. You should respect labor, and thereby, that is why he emphasized not only labor-intensive technology but also respect for labor. But there is again a rider to this. We can't say that the poor people who toil, they work in day and night for a pittance. You can't give this as a dignity, as a bread labor. You can't say, of course, you have to respect their labor, but it doesn't mean that people have to continue in this kind of a toil. Their physical toil has to be reduced. Those who don't do this physical toil, those who don't do physical labor have to work more. They have to do physical. But it doesn't mean that the poor masses have to again work more. In their case, their tedium, their drudgery has to be reduced. They have to be respected for their work, but at the same time, we have to devise ways of reducing their drudgery and sharing their labor with us. See. That was his. Now, Gandhiji had one more arrow in his quiver against poverty. Not only giving respect to labor and decentralization, but his idea of trusteeship as such. In fact, this has become famous and all of you are aware of this, but still I will explain a bit of it. And what he said is this, the importance of Gandhian idea of trusteeship is that thereby he tried to reconcile capitalism with socialism. The best in capitalism is reconciled with the best in socialism through his idea of trusteeship. That is how. See, the best in capitalism, according to Gandhi, is that it gives scope for individuals' initiative. It gives incentives to work more, to work hard. As far as scope for incentives is concerned, capitalism is, he considered superior to socialism. But as far as socialism is concerned, the principal virtue of socialism is that the poor people are taken care of by the state. Now, in this case, in that idea, Gandhiji would say that he didn't trust the state acting as the trustee for everything. He had, in fact, you can say that he had distrust in a centralized state. He didn't think that state would act very efficiently and honestly as far as in the task of providing for the poor and in eliminating poverty. He wanted it to supplement with private enterprise. His economic system had a place for private enterprise, though as decentralized as possible. But to the extent that there is need for centralization, you can work, you can develop your enterprise to some extent, you can earn more. But when you earn more than your basic needs, more than your comfort, set aside this surplus for meeting the basic needs of the poor. So you consider yourself as a trustee for the surplus that you earn and spend it on the poor. That was the idea. Now, Gandhiji, of course, he thought over this a good deal. And several people asked him, do you think that man is so altruistic that he can be trusted, that he will develop this trust and he can willingly spend so much on labor? He said, of course, we have to, through moral education, through moral development, we have to induce people to have this kind of an attitude of altruism and helping the poor. But in case he didn't mind taxing the surplus wealth if trusteeship principle didn't work in practice. He didn't mind. And in fact, if this trusteeship is being manipulated to meet private needs, for any private profiteering or avoidance of taxes and so on. He didn't mind strict regulation of the trusts. So, in fact, this idea is not as impractical as it seemed at that time, because we now see so many trusts doing a lot of good work. In fact, we have this Tata Trust, this Infosys Foundation, Azim Premji's Trust. There are several trusts which have come into being. They are doing a lot of good work out of surplus wealth generated in private enterprise. So the Gandhian idea of trusteeship is not as impractical as it generally seemed is here. In a group of Gandhian followers who also believed in socialism went to Gandhi and in his consent, with his approval, drafted a code of his philosophy of how to fight inequality and poverty. And they jotted down some principles which were published in Young India in 1931. And the leader of this group was Professor M.L. Dantwala, a famous agricultural economist. I'll just read some of these simple codes. The first point in this was, trusteeship provides a means of transforming the present capitalist order of society into an egalitarian one. It gives no quarter to capitalism. Trusteeship, in fact, he doesn't see trusteeship as capitalism. It gives no quarter to capitalism, but gives present owning class a chance of reforming itself. It is based on the faith that human nature is never beyond redemption. Second point, it does not recognize any rights of private ownership of property, except insofar as it may be permitted by the society for its own welfare. So there is no absolute right to private property in Gandhian philosophy, as far as, at least in terms of this. Third, it does not exclude legislative regulation of ownership and use of wealth. Fourth, thus under state-regulated trusteeship, an individual will not be free to hold or use wealth for selfish satisfaction or in disregard of the interests of the society. 5. Just as it imposed is proposed to fix a minimum decent living wage, even so a limit should be fixed on maximum income or wealth that would be allowed to any person in society, and the difference between such incomes, minimum and maximum, should be reasonable and equitable and variable from time to time, so much so that the tendency would be towards obliteration of the difference. The last point is, under the Gandhian economic order, the character of production will be determined by social necessity and not by personal whim or greed. So this is how, and this code of principle, though this was actually personally approved by Gandhi, and they were published, the whole list was published in Young India in 1931 in 2 issues dated 17th March and 16th April. Now, so the point is that Gandhiji put a lot of stress on moral responsibility. One should accept one's moral responsibilities. One should accept social responsibility. One should be conscious of it. And that helps one's own individual development and also social development. There is a now Gandhiji's relevance to, or his relevance of his ideas to conflict resolution has been appreciated after Gandhi's demise. In fact, much better than during his days, at least in intellectual circles. An interesting book entitled Conquest of Violence, The Gandhian Philosophy of Conflict, written by John Bondurant, was published in 1967 by University of California Press. Later on, more recently, in 1992, another book appeared by John Galtung. The book is The Way is the Goal, Gandhi Today. And then this later book by John Galtung developed 3 norms for conflict resolution. What is Gandhian approach to conflict resolution? And this conflict resolution is seen not only in terms of merely between individuals, but between even states and states, institutions and institutions, communities and communities, and even between countries and countries. This was and any field of conflict could be resolved through following some norms, Gandhian approach. Now, the first norm says that conflict should be first defined well. What is exactly the conflict? Where is the conflict? What are the essential differences between the two opponents? What is the stand of these opponents? And then once you appreciate this, once you put it down in writing, you see what are the most essential things demanded, what are the most essential things in the stand of each party, and what are the less essential things where compromise can be easily made. So what is known as now is called as confidence building measures. So you can start with confidence building measures, at least as far as the less essential aspects are concerned, and work your way up to resolving conflict in the essentials. Then the second norm is both parties to the conflict should agree right in the beginning to avoid any violence. We have to abide by non-violence, and would not harm each other's interests in any way, verbally or militarily or physically in any way. We don't harm each other. That is another thing which is to be agreed to in the instance. And the third norm is to, as I said, insist on the essentials and then try to enlarge the resolution, the scope of the agreement, step by step, with patience, without rancor, and with love to the opposite parties. Both should resolve that we don't hate each other, we like you, we let us sit together as friends and resolve this in the interest of humanity, in the interest of world peace and our own happiness. Because conflict as such leads to a lot of cost, unaffordable cost on both sides. So this has to be agreed. So Gandhiji did not favor third-party intervention. He preferred that the parties to conflict should resolve this themselves. Another field where Gandhian approach is very relevant, I can take a few more minutes. Another field where Gandhian approach is very relevant is in the field of multiplicity of faith or multiplicity of religions. Religion should be a factor of peace. It should be a factor for moral development, human development. But unfortunately, religions have become also areas of conflict. Now, what would be Gandhian's approach? In fact, I have explained this in a full-length chapter in my book on Ethics for Our Times, published in 2011, which Sri Ramaswamy referred to, published by Oxford University Press. There is a full-length chapter on Gandhiji's approach to religious differences. Now, let me very briefly summarize it here. Let us imagine 3 possible ways of resolving interreligious conflicts. One is in the presence of multiplicity of faiths. One is, though only one religion is accepted as the official religion. Other religions are accepted as secondary, and only one religion has, the other secondary religions are tolerated, but they have no equal rights. This is a solution which Gandhiji would never have approved. You see. What is the second way of resolving multiplicity of faiths or conflicts between faiths? The second is, all religions have equal rights to worship, preach, propagate, and convert. But there is no interaction between them except rivalry. There is only rivalry, competition between religions, but there is no proper understanding, no interaction as such. But all religions are recognized as equal. There is neutrality between religions by this government. This is also a situation which Gandhiji wouldn't have approved. This may be better than the first one, but even this Gandhiji wouldn't have approved. The third possible way, alternative, is all the religions have equal rights, but there is no fanatical observance of clean demarcation of boundaries. In the second and the first approach, there is clear demarcation of boundaries between different religions. This is my religion, this is your religion. My religion says this, your religion says that. There is a demarcation of boundaries in the first two alternatives. But in this, there is no clear demarcation of boundaries. We, on the other hand, we see bridges, overlapping spaces between different religions, points of commonality between different religions. There would be interaction between them. There would be learning from others, each one, without any bar from imbibing values from one religion to another. For example, Hindus can learn from Christians and Muslims. Muslims can in turn learn from Hindus and Christians, and that way we learn from each other religion as such, for betterment of the whole society and a moral development of the whole country. And so this was the third approach, third situation, or the third way, which would have been Gandhi's approach to religion. In fact, Gandhiji often declared that he is a Hindu. He even said he is a Sanatani Hindu. But he also added, my Hinduism doesn't exclude Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, and other religions. It imbibes the values of the best in all religions. And the approach in this case is that, well, I am not following, he even said that, I am not fanatically following the scriptures of anything because it is a God-given or something. In fact, he said he didn't accept any scripture as apaurushaya or divine revelation. He said that all scriptures are expressed through man. All scriptures in all religions have shortcomings. We should critically think over what we should accept and what we should reject. We should have that openness. All religions should have this openness. That was Gandhian approach to religion. That is how Gandhiji made an important contribution to India's definition of secularism. Though, of course, Indian secularism is not exactly, it doesn't follow Gandhian ideal in all respects, but to a great extent, Gandhiji made a contribution. Indian secularism, as you know, is not like Western secularism, where there is isolation between politics and religion. Gandhiji didn't like the idea of isolating politics from religion. But he accepted relevance of religion even to politics, but religion in the sense of ethics. Religion, when applicable to politics, is in the sense of ethics, not in terms of dogma or doctrines, in terms of only ethics. And in fact, one of the perceptive observers of Gandhian, the interpreters of Gandhian philosophy is the Iranian Jahan Beglu. He said, Ramin Jahan Beglu, he said, Gandhiji's mission was not to politicize religion, but to spiritualize politics. That was Gandhian. Now, one thing with Gandhi is, though of course he accepted interaction between religions, he did not approve of conversions from one religion to another. He was very strong on that point, and even said that if I had the power, I would ban conversions from one religion to another. Because the whole idea is that we should learn, we should be free to learn from each other. If you convert, it means you renounce one religion and accept another, which means you accept boundaries between religions. Conversion actually confirms this isolation between different religions, whereas Gandhian approach is to give up these boundaries, learn from each other. Recently, Sri Ravi Shankar expressed this idea in a very witty way. You don't have to become a Swiss to enjoy Swiss chocolates. You enjoy Swiss chocolates, but you don't have to become a Swiss. So you can imbibe the values from other religions, but you don't have to necessarily convert to other religions. You can imbibe, see what is there. Learn from each other. Don't have to convert. So this brings together people from religions, different religions from one another. So one last observation about Gandhi's religion. Gandhi's religion was not a relaxed and romantic religion of a poet philosopher inspired by gazing at the beauty of the dawn or the mystery of distant stars in the night sky. It was a religion born of empathy with the hungry peasant, exploited labor, and victims of tyranny and oppressors. Gandhi's religion was extremely practical and unselfish. Even his concept of God was practical. He observed that God appears before the poor in the form of bread. God realization meant removal of poverty and hunger. Nothing can be more relevant than this concept. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that lovely lecture, Professor. I'm actually Rajiv. My PhD is on Gandhi. I'm studying in America and I work on Gandhian traditions. So I can say that the lecture was very informative and straight from the sources. So I'm someone who's been working on Gandhi for some time. I have a question to you. And my question flows from Lohiya's interpretation of Gandhi. And Lohiya, in a famous essay, said once that there are three kinds of Gandhians, that there's a Matha Gandhi, there is a Sarkari Gandhi, and there is the third kind of Gandhi, which is the heretic Gandhi. That is the tradition that does not, and you made the point about those who do not read Gandhi very literally. And it is that third tradition of Gandhi that I have a question to you on. And I'm very interested in seeing how Karnataka itself has developed its own tradition of Gandhi. You made a point about J.C. Kumarappa. I think there are similar other such Gandhians that Lohiya is referring to, which are in Karnataka. And I wanted to know from you if you can just tell us something about that. And I think when I ask you the question, I already have certain things in mind. Say works of people like Devnur Mahadeva, for example. Such are the works that I have in mind when I ask you if you can just elaborate on this. Thank you.
See, not only in Karnataka, there are many examples in the world today where Gandhian principles have been followed. Radical Gandhi, not Sarkari Gandhi, but Radical Gandhi. In fact, the famous movement by Martin Luther King, you see, Gandhi was the major inspiration behind this movement. And in fact, I don't know to what extent the non-violent expressions of Arab Spring has followed Gandhian principles of non-violence. Of course, there was violence also and to that extent it created problem. But in many instances, non-violent resistance and to fight oppression has been a major success in several cases. Not only in respect of fighting oppression, social oppression, but also in terms of the state oppression within the country. See, this has been, and as far as the environmental movement is concerned, this Gandhi also has been a major, major inspiration. In the Himalayas, this Chipko movement is to some extent Gandhian in inspiration, you see. So, particularly with reference to Karnataka, one can say that there have been environmental movements in Karnataka also, and to the extent they have followed non-violence, they have been Gandhian in character. See, you can have. There are many examples like this. Yes, please come.
Sir, I have not studied Gandhi in depth, but my knowledge is just based on common sense and listening to lectures from people like you, sir. What has happened was we call Mahatma Gandhi as father of the nation. After listening to your lecture, sir, I felt we have done great injustice to him, because when the people who are opposing Gandhian philosophy, actually like Britishers and the people, leaders from our continent, I think what Mahatma Gandhi was telling was truth and non-violence. But when these people introduced many modern systems, which has created so many complex systems, probably they should have ensured that truth and non-violence should have been ensured by these people. It is not done. What action has been taken by the people who are opponents of Gandhi, who have introduced that? Are they not responsible for this? Whether our younger generation should not get a sort of a message, as you have given message today, in much simpler terms, so that primary school children can learn something about Gandhiji. But I don't know whether it is introduced nowadays. But I felt that we have not learnt much. So in history and all that, we have learnt about Gandhiji, and we celebrate Gandhi Jayanti, etc., except that we are not telling in a forceful way the way you have done this. Because I got a feeling truth and non-violence, if we follow, there will be no problems. But industrialization has created so much complex systems, it shelters a lot of falsehood. That's what I hate. Thank you very much.
I agree with you. In fact, there is need for disseminating Gandhiji's ideas at all levels, right from even primary education up to even university level. They should be inculcating Gandhian values, and in fact the importance of physical labor, bread labor. Gandhiji was so much insistence on bread labor that he insisted that in his education system, Nai Talim, he insisted that students should also do bread labor to earn their living. It's not earn their living, at least to some extent. That is, they should do physical work and they should develop respect for physical labor, manual labor. So there are different ways in which we have to inculcate Gandhian values, and I agree that this has not been being done to a satisfactory run. I think we should do it. I agree that.
Says that the media are exaggerating conflict situations, and is there any way in which we can control the media from their devious ways? That's the question.
Well, media also should inculcate Gandhian values of truth and non-violence. You see, they should be more responsible, morally be responsible to reveal truth. pursuit of truth is an important goal of media, I see. In fact, it's a very important, in fact, it's the very bread of media. Pursuit of truth is a very important principle for media. And if we don't do that, you see, then they will be deviating from this moral duty of media, I see. So, one should not exaggerate, we should give the facts, and we should try to act in a way that the news should be reported in a way that they lead to resolution of conflict rather than aggravation of the conflict, you see. Quite agree with you.
We will close. ನಾಳೆ ಸಂಜೆ ಶ್ರೀ ಆರ್ ಜಿ ಮಳಗಿ ಅವರಿಂದ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಶ್ರೀಕೃಷ್ಣನ ಆದರ್ಶಗಳು ನಾಳೆ ಸಂಜೆ. ನಾವು ನಿರೀಕ್ಷಿಸಿದ ಹಾಗೆ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸ್ತರಗಳ ಚಿಂತನೆಯ ಒಂದು ಸಮಗ್ರವಾದ ಪರಾಮರ್ಶನಾತ್ಮಕವಾದ ಮತ್ತು ವಿಶ್ಲೇಷಣಾತ್ಮಕವಾದ ಅವಲೋಕನವನ್ನು ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಎಂ ವಿ ನಾಡ್ಕರ್ಣಿ ಅವರು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಸಾಂದರ್ಭಿಕತೆ ಹಾಗೆ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ಆಗಿ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಅಂತಿಮ ವರ್ಷಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರನ್ನು ಕಾಡಿದ್ದ ನಿರಾಶಾಭಾವನೆ, ಆದರೆ 60 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ನಂತರ ಇವತ್ತು ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಚಿಂತನೆ ಪ್ರಾಸಂಗಿಕ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾದ ಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಉಂಟಾಗಿರೋದು, ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಅವರು ವಿವರಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರು ಒತ್ತಿ ಹೇಳಿದ ಸತ್ಯ, ಅಹಿಂಸೆ ಮೊದಲಾದವು ಕೇವಲ ವೇದಾಂತ ತತ್ವಗಳಲ್ಲ, ಬದಲಾಗಿ ವ್ಯಾವಹಾರಿಕ ಪ್ರಕ್ರಿಯೆ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಗಮನ ಸೆಳೆದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಪರಿಸರಾತ್ಮಕ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಅಂತಿಮ ಪರಿಹಾರ ಅಂದರೆ ಈ ಸಮಾಜೋನ್ನತ ವರ್ಗಗಳು ಏನಿವೆ ಅವುಗಳು ದಿ ಶುಡ್ ಕಾನ್ಷಿಯಸ್ ಲಿಮಿಟೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ದೇರ್ ವಾಂಟ್ಸ್. ಇದು ಅಂತಿಮವಾದ ಪರಿಹಾರ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಬೇರೆ ಪರಿಹಾರ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳಿಂದಾಗಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ಮೂಲಗಳಿಂದಾಗಲಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇರಲಾರದು ಅಂತ. ಒಟ್ಟಿನ ಮೇಲೆ ಇದು ಎಲ್ಲದರ ತಾತ್ಪರ್ಯ ವಿಕೇಂದ್ರೀಕರಣ, ಡಿಸೆಂಟ್ರಲೈಸ್ಡ್ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್. ಇದು ಅಪೇಕ್ಷಣೀಯ ಮಾತ್ರವಲ್ಲ, ಅಂತಿಮವಾಗಿ ಅದು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ದಕ್ಷ ಅಂತ ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಇನ್ನು ಉಳಿದಂತೆ ರೆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಫಾರ್ ಲೇಬರ್, ಟ್ರಸ್ಟಿಶಿಪ್, ಈ ಕಲ್ಪನೆಗಳ ಅಪೇಕ್ಷತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಎರಡು ಮಾತು ಇರೋದು ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಪರಿಸರದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಕಾನ್ಫ್ಲಿಕ್ಟ್ ರೆಸಲ್ಯೂಷನ್, ಈ ತತ್ವಗಳಿಗೆ, ಈ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರು ಏನು ತತ್ವಗಳನ್ನ ಎನ್ಸಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಅದು ಆದರ್ಶಮಯ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನಿಸಿದ್ರು. ಅಂತಿಮವಾಗಿ ಅದು ಒಂದೇ ಪರ್ಯಾಯ ಹೊರತು ಬೇರೆ ಪರ್ಯಾಯ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಗ್ರಹಿಸಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಅದು ಈಗ ಎಷ್ಟೇ ಅವ್ಯಾವಹಾರಿಕ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನಿಸಿದ್ರು ಅಂತಿಮವಾಗಿ ಅದೇ ಪರ್ಯಾಯಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಮುಟ್ಟಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಮನಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು. ಈ ಮೂಲಭೂತವಾದ ಆಧಾರ ಸ್ವರೂಪದ ಚಿಂತನೆಗೆ ಗಮನ ಸೆಳೆದು ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಎಂ ವಿ ನಾಡ್ಕರ್ಣಿ ಅವರು ಉಪಕರಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಗೋಖಲೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾಗೂ ನಿಟ್ಟೂರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾವ್ ಪರಿವಾರದ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆ ಸಲ್ಲಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಬನ್ನಿ.